Mount Shasta, a place of mystery where they see UFOs, Bigfoot, weird shit like gnomes peeking around trees, like I said. And it's said, from what I've read and looked into even a long, long time ago, I found an article by this psychic, basically, and she was able to see inside of Mount Shasta. And there's saber-toothed tigers and all this shit that these Lemurians from Atlantis times saved before the Ice Age and this cataclysm that occurred about 12,000 years ago. And it kind of lines up with Admiral Byrd seeing these mammoths and stuff, these huge woolly mammoths in Antarctica. And right before he was taken underground where these Nordic-like beings were. And these Nordic-like beings are exactly what are described around Mount Shasta. There's these Nordic, blonde-haired, tall beings that look like light beings because they're so white. They used to come down to the town of Shasta and stuff, and they would trade goods and stuff like gold and stuff with some of the settlers around that time in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's even said, very, very random and weird, but one of these Nordic or Lemurian beings that are tall and white went down to San Francisco in World War I, when World War I was going on, and I don't know if it was a talk about World War I, but it seemed like these Nordic beings or these pale beings during World War II did give a message to Admiral Byrd about, setting off nukes and stuff and how that's messing with their world as well. And then you go back to, I think, the late 1800s, one of these beings from Shambhala, the Himalayan mountains, an ascended master, one of these tall white beings, came and talked to the Dalai Lama and predicted World War II and all this shit. So that's 3 encounters that we supposedly have had with these Lemurians or these Nordic-like beings with, officials, like people that are higher up in the government or leaders or whatever. So, very interesting. I'm a believer there is a city called Telos in Mount Shasta, and yeah, they've been protecting some of this old life from before the Ice Age and stuff. Maybe some of that life is Bigfoot. Because it's said that the Native Americans would see these Nordic-like beings and these moon-like orb crafts come and drop off Bigfoot on their land or on their, habitat. And so maybe these Bigfoot were from Earth or from a time before the Ice Age, and they're kind of higher dimensional beings at this point, so the Nordics are looking after them and taking care of these Bigfoot, but they let them, just like a dog, go to the park or go outside. They go see their natural habitat, and then they bring them back in the inner Earth because, us humans wouldn't be able to comprehend these Bigfoot. So I think that's partially where Bigfoot comes from, is this inner Earth. Some of these Nordic-like beings, these tall, blonde-haired, pale-skinned beings, are said to have a little organ that comes out of their forehead. So to me, that represents a third eye, and it helps them with their telekinesis. They are telepaths, basically. They don't really communicate with their mouths or vocals. So I think that's very, very interesting. That's what I would think would happen. When we talk about this third eye and all this shit, I would assume when we go to the next level of consciousness, this next dimension of the 4th dimension, we would gain certain aspects like that. That pineal gland would be more predominant, and we could communicate through far more advanced ways than our throats, our vocal cords and stuff. So that's something I found interesting. And you hear reports of these blonde-haired beings from the Black Forest of Germany when Hitler recovered that UFO crash. Then we have the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of people in the 1700s, early 1800s talked about these blonde, tall beings being inside these mountains. And even the Native Americans talked about the moon-eyed people in the Appalachian Mountains. And I think they're talking about these Nordics. And then the Puans, these Nordic-like beings they describe in Peru and Argentina and stuff that are in the Andes Mountains. There is something to it. There's in the Ozarks, even in the Ozark Mountains, there's been reports of these blonde-haired beings, even abducting people and stuff. So, yeah, man, it's a weird theory, but there's something to it. I think they're what we call these Agarthans, these inner Earth beings. They use crystal energy to heal themselves and all this shit. Even Admiral Byrd described crystal-like energy being used in the place that he was taken to in Antarctica. So I think a lot of these inner Earth beings are just a previous civilization. Actually, in Mongolia, too, there was this Russian that was looking for Shambhala. He would see this UFO that was kind of like following them, and then eventually he ran into these like inner Earth people. They came out of a crevasse in the mountains and spoke of this time of Atlantis and stuff, and how they went into inner Earth afterwards, after the Ice Age and flood. And we see this. We see these ancient underground cities in Turkey and LA, throughout America and the Grand Canyon and shit. Like, there was some kind of civilization that was under Earth, and it makes sense because there was thousands of years where Earth was flooded or under ice. So it's not that crazy to think. There's too much evidence pointing towards these underground civilizations to deny it. So anyways, continuing with the wackiness of Mount Shasta, certain whistleblowers, I won't say their names because some of them are controversial, but some of them talk about there's like portals into Mount Shasta. That's why you see all these UFOs fly like into the mountain, but then they don't crash or anything. They're just inside the mountain. That's said with Dulce, New Mexico, that Archuleta Mesa, UFOs are said to have flown into that without crashing, and same with Skinwalker Ranch. There's a mesa there that they see UFOs going in and out of. It's weird. It's like these places open up or something, or the dimension that they're on, the material, rock and stuff, doesn't do anything to them. They're able to just still glide right into wherever the fuck they're going. It's very interesting, beyond our comprehension, obviously, these UFOs and the phenomenon of going into mountains. So, and then Mount Shasta has this weird cloud around it. There's always this weird cloud that people can't explain. Some whistleblowers say it's like a security system, that these Lemurians, they have technology far beyond ours that's natural, but they're able to actually disguise the mountain. Like when you're walking around Mount Shasta, some people get turned around. There's so many missing people too around Mount Shasta, it's believable, but people get confused and don't know where they are because they have these little force fields around the mountain, and if you walk into it, it actually turns you around. You don't notice it, but you get turned around or you get put in a different place. And some people accidentally get through gaps in this force field, and they end up going into Mount Shasta, basically. And that's where we get all these missing people around Mount Shasta. Some of them just disappear right in front of people's eyes sometimes, but it's because they're going into like a force field. And some of these people get into actual Telos, but then the people in Telos have to like wipe their memory and then try to put these people back into the real world, but sometimes they don't know where they belong. So some of these people end up thousands of miles away and then become homeless and crazy because they don't have any memory of who they are and shit. There's a couple cases like that. So also, there's a good case, missing case, at least one of the first like legit missing people around Mount Shasta was this dude, J.C. Brown. He had discovered like an entrance to Mount Shasta in 1904. And he went deep in. He actually walked in there, and about 4 miles into Mount Shasta, there's like a little village. And it looked like it belonged to like giants and stuff, because he eventually found like mummified remains of like these 6 foot, 7 foot tall beings. And all this like kind of almost hieroglyphic looking shit, like almost Egyptian looking, but mixed with like Hinduism, which is interesting because that's also described in the Grand Canyon. There's these hieroglyphics, but then there's like this Buddhist or like Hindu looking statue that they can't explain as shit. Anyways, there's a bunch of gold and other stuff inside of Mount Shasta that he found that seemed to be part of a lost civilization. And also, you hear of giants in mountains all the time. Fucking Lovelock Caves, the red-haired giants, they had like gold and all this other weird shit inside the cave with them. So, a lot of these beings possibly were giants, or these beings that lived to be 800 years old, and then when the flood happened and the atmosphere grew weaker, maybe the sun started affecting them more. They had to go underground because their skin couldn't handle, the sun and all this shit. So, there's a whole theory that their whole habitat, or this whole area where they used to live in, just wasn't habitable anymore for them, so they had to go underground and stuff. It just wasn't suitable for them. They're used to a lighter and nicer environment that could handle their vibe and consciousness and stuff, and then, that all got fucked up with the flood and pole shift and all that shit. So they went underground. Anyways, now that I'm looking at my notes, it looks like he actually went 11 miles into the mountain, and he found beings that were up to 10 foot tall. So that's interesting. I was kind of underestimating it, but I guess, or underguesstimating it. But yeah, so that's pretty far too into the mountain, 11 miles. So he went pretty far, but he went missing right when he was starting an expedition. He got all these people, like I think 80 people or something, to come with him into the mountain. And then the morning of, them going to go explore this mountain and stuff and find what's going on in Mount Shasta, he disappeared. And the whole entrance has been covered up or something because no one's been able to find it again. The Smithsonian, I think, is behind it. The Smithsonian came and took some of these 10-foot beings, just like they have all over the world, or all over this country at least. They've taken these giant skeletons and hid them away. I don't know what the fuck the deal is. They really don't want us to know about our true past. But speaking of that weird cloud around Mount Shasta that seems to be, possibly part of some kind of natural, high-tech, advanced technology that's able to shield parts of the mountain for when these UFOs come and go. People aren't specifically able to see where these UFOs are entering. Anyways, it reminds me of Hy Brazil, this legendary island off of Ireland that disappeared in the 1800s. It's said that it was always surrounded by fog for 7 years, and then the fog would, lift up, and then it would be exposed for just a day or so, and then the fog would come back for another 7 years. So it seems like that maybe is also a cloaking thing, because Hy Brazil, the couple stories that there are of the actual island itself, it's said that there's wizards and this crystal-like natural energy and weird, crazy castles made of crystal that have weird beings in them and stuff, and giant rabbits and all this shit. So I just think possibly Hy Brazil is just another remnant of this Atlantis or Lemuria, and they just have this kind of technology that was able to disguise themselves. And maybe they had disappeared in the 1800s because us, when it comes to our third eye and our consciousness, maybe we're becoming so set in a material world, especially after the Industrial Revolution, that we stopped seeing these things. It just disappeared out of our mind because we can't see that dimension anymore. We can't comprehend that kind of shit, so we can't even see it now. Or maybe it just disappeared. I don't know. Or maybe it was never a thing to begin with. But either way, fascinating story that you can kind of connect. It's all connected, man. All these stories around the world that deal with Nordic beings or inner Earth or UFOs or Bigfoot, it's all connected. That's why one of my last episodes that I'm going to do on Into the Looking Glass is going to be called The Great Connection, where we connect fucking everything. But earlier, I was talking about how some people are called the Mount Shasta. Me and my buddy, we weren't the only people that have this feeling, this urge. After I've looked into it and done more research, it's crazy, bro. There's people who actually have moved to Mount Shasta because they have this calling. Like, it wasn't just me. Like, it was so weird. And then me and my buddy, Nick, who I started this podcast with, our whole plan was go to Mount Shasta this last summer, but he ended up going to jail and stuff, so that whole plan went down the drain. But I need to go to Mount Shasta. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I need to go there. I need to explore it and shit. Even if I go missing, man, I need to know what the mystery is there. So, anyways, just a weird mountain, man. And got a lot of weird shit. Naturally, they think there's rapids that run under the mountain, and they think that causes some kind of energy, a natural energy. Along with the mountain itself, tectonic plates and stuff, they develop a kind of energy. That's why I think a lot of mountain ranges contain actual energy, and that's where a lot of vortexes are. And I think Mount Shasta is just kind of a vortex made of all this natural energy. And it's also known as a chakra point. They say it's like the navel or the belly button of Earth. So Mount Shasta is just important energy-wise. So many weird tales that Native Americans have to say about Mount Shasta too, from Bigfoot to tales that were almost 12,000 years ago when Mount Shasta became an actual image for these Native Americans. They think it's actually where life started. Some people think the gods actually came to Mount Shasta and made life, and Mount Shasta was the first mountain and all this stuff. So a lot of weird tales, but one tale I want to get into is about Skull and Lao. Skull, or Scowl, whatever you want to call him, Scal, was killed by Lao, who was an underworld god of Mount Shasta. Followers of Skull, though, took his heart and resurrected him. And then he confronted his old friend and recent enemy, Lao. And I think this is so fucking similar to the story with Osiris and Seth, whatever, brothers that, Set killed Osiris and cut him up and spread his body, and then Osiris's followers found his body, put him together, and then brought him back. And that shit happens all the time. Same with Quetzalcoatl and the God of War. It's just this battle between Inki and Enlil, man. This Skull and Lao. It's just another story about them. So I do wonder, I think Mount Shasta's story actually possibly happens, though, before Osiris and the Quetzalcoatl story. I think this story is even more ancient than Osiris and stuff, possibly. Unless they're all just the same story based off of something that happened a long-ass time ago that has been somehow retaught amongst all of the humans of ancient times. So I just think, there's some weird shit with that. There's a whole battle and stuff between them, like a godlike battle, and some people think that's where the Crater Lake comes from. They think some kind of big blast from these gods fighting created Crater Lake. And then there's this little tiny island in Crater Lake, and some believe that's like the head of Lao. When he was defeated, he became this little island. And there's really ancient tales about the Nephilim becoming mountains. Some of the Nephilim, these huge, huge giants that lived on Earth, once they were smited and killed and shit, they just became the mountains. Some people even see, supposedly, almost the definition of bodies, like these giant bodies that make up mountain ranges and shit. So, very, very far out there theory and probably not a real thing, but still interesting that these people always think these gods turn into, an island or mountains or something like that after they're defeated. And Crater Lake is just weird. There's a lot of weird phenomenon that happens with Crater Lake. That I won't get into much. You guys can look up Beneath the Surface. He has a good whole documentary about Crater Lake and some of the weird shit that happens there. Like the tree. There's this tree that floats around in Crater Lake for the last, I don't know how many hundreds of years, and people can't explain why that tree's still sitting upright in the water, and it seems like it controls itself. Some people think it's like controlled by Lao or something like that, and you're not supposed to take the tree out. Some people have tried to take the tree out of the lake, and then these big storms come out of nowhere, and so they just leave the tree alone. So weird stuff, man. But besides, the calling to Mount Shasta and the spirit numbers and all that shit, around that same time I had a really weird dream where I was actually like taken into Inner Earth, or I was just in Inner Earth. And it was still one of the most craziest dreams I've ever had, because it didn't feel like a dream. It felt different. It felt like I was on a different conscious connection. Like, I don't know how to put it, but I was like there, and there was these beings that almost looked grass-like, like they kind of waved around, kind of like something would in the wind, and they spoke to me telepathically, and it was beautiful. It was like this glow too that I would think would be an inner earth glow. If there's an inner sun or something like that, it would be a constant, kind of glow. And like the green children of Woolpit, they actually, when they were found, they said they were from like an inner earth area where there's a constant glow, like a sun, a twilight. There's a constant twilight, like as if it was dusk all the time. And that's how I've always imagined Inner Earth. In this Monarch show that just came out about Godzilla, they go in the Inner Earth, and it's the same fucking thing. It's this weird twilight. And it's fucking dope. So anyways, this dream, though, was cool because I could see Earth slope up in front of me. Since you're in Inner Earth, you could see, the ocean going around a peninsula, and it was in front of you, but like miles and miles and miles away. But the water just stayed, whether it was gravity or whatever, it stayed around you. It didn't come off or whatever. It was very, very interesting. One of the coolest dreams I've had. When I woke up, I immediately had to draw it out. I had to draw what I saw and stuff, and It was pretty epic. So I don't know what that had to do with the whole getting called to Mount Shasta, but Mount Shasta is an inner Earth entrance,